All right, come on back if you wandered off, or have a seat if you're at your table. We'll get started here. So we're just going to take next 15, 20 minutes, something like that. This is totally impromptu, so we're just trusting the Spirit to make this meaningful to all of you and to us. So I want to introduce our guests. First of all, these two ladies this morning, I just texted them this morning and say, hey, would you be willing to come up here to do this? So would you please applaud them for their tremendous courage? Yeah. And you can applaud for Ryan too, but he's got to do this because we're partnering together. So, right?
Yeah, Dan didn't give me a choice.
That's right. All right, so you heard from Ryan, so I'm going to introduce Deanne. Mulvihill, thank you. So she's going to tell you a little bit about her business, because your business, but you've been the director of the Chamber of Commerce in Berthoud, and now acting one. And then on to my right here, to your left, is Mindy Mccloughan, who's the president and CEO of the Loveland Chamber of Commerce. And so I know of Mindy from a distance, from people that have spoke so highly of her. Getting to know her more, I know Deanne very well, but they're tremendous people of faith in their place that God's positioned them. So I'm honored to have them here. So what we want to talk about, and I'll turn it over to you first, so be ready, is we want to share candidly, transparently with you our perspective from what we've been thinking about even this morning. How do we as leaders have a tendency, or leaders we've seen, lose their way and their why? And then just brainstorm a little bit of what are the things that will keep us more tethered to our true calling with God. So take it away. Tell us a little bit about your business first.
Well, first, is this on? Okay. Yep. So first of all, right now I am the part-time interim executive director at the Berthoud Area Chamber of Commerce. And I say it that way because I want it to be part-time interim executive director. We're on the search for someone new. I started at the Berthoud Chamber in 2013 and retired when God told me to in 2019. And I remember I had tears in my eyes as I sat at the kitchen counter typing my letter of retirement and telling the chamber that I was going to leave because I wanted to be the best grandmother I could to my grandkids. That was my decision, that I was spending more hours at the chamber, and I didn't want to be remembered for being a great chamber executive. I wanted to be remembered for a great grandmother. So that's when I retired. And then COVID hit, and then I sent praises to God. I'm like, thank you so much. I wasn't having to do all of that during the COVID time. Everybody kept coming to me when the Berthoud Chamber lost their executive director, and they said, are you coming back? And I kept giving this answer, God hasn't told me to. It's not happening. No, I'm not going back. And then God told me, you're going back. And I think more than anything, it's listening, praying, and being open. If you don't take those quiet times and you plow through always as a leader, and you just know, you just keep your head down and go, you don't hear God talking. And I think more than anything, it's taking those pause moments and then asking for help and then listening.
I love that. And I love your heart to be, your mission being a grandmother. You haven't rejected that yet. Yeah, so as I'm listening to you, one of the ways I'm hearing you say is how do we keep tethered to what God's calling is for us, not to lose our way and our why. Is if there's no margin, there's no mission. You gotta listen to the Lord and spend time with Him, right?
Big time. And I have to tell you, I first came to Kingdom Way Ministries here at Timberline Church. I found out from a friend they were doing it, so of course I always bring someone with me, and I brought someone with me. But this is the first church where I cried. I cried every Sunday. And I just thought something was wrong with this church. I'm like, every time I came on Sunday, I cried. But God was doing something to me He had never done before. I was brought up in a traditional church where I was baptized as a baby. And I came here, and I hadn't heard the word like I heard here. Never was it spoken to me, and I hadn't heard it like this. So anytime there's an activity here, I just love to come back to the church that made me cry. That's what I always say, but in a good way, in a really good way.
That's awesome. So if you don't have a church home, you like to cry, come on and visit Timberline Church. That'll work. So one of the reasons I asked these ladies to come is not only they're business leaders in their own right, incredible ones at that in the community, but they work with a lot of business owners and people in our community. So if you're too chicken to share anything about yourself, you could say, well, I know some people that have struggled with this. So, so we'll leave it to you to be a personal or example. How have you seen people kind of drift?
Well, first of all, be careful what you pray for, because just last night, David and I were in our prayer time before I went to sleep, and I said, God, we just want to be the hands and feet of Jesus. Show me where I can be of service to you. And then my phone goes off at 5:30 this morning. So, hence, be careful what you pray for, because I knew I couldn't say no at that point. I am 26 years in the industry. I came from a small town in East Texas. 15 years at that chamber before recruiting me here. I came to know Jesus Christ as my Savior when I was 29 years old. Had a very traumatic background, an alcoholic father and an addict mother, and was probably voted most likely never to succeed in high school. My mother was married 8 times and multiple live-in lovers in between. So I learned at a very young age, if it is to be, it is up to me. And I took on that mantra that I was going to be successful no matter what. Again, I didn't come to know the Lord until I was 29 years old. Fast forward to where we are today. God has always been a part of my life and my profession, and I am an admitted workaholic. I am probably the queen of window dressing, get up, dress up, and show up, and never, ever, ever give up. So I could make things look beautiful on the outside and perfect. And if I had a perfect house, I had a perfect children, I had a perfect husband, I had a perfect job, no one would see the damaged little girl inside. Fast forward to 2017, my best friend died of colon cancer. 6 months later, my other best friend died of a heart attack. 9 months later, my second mom died of a heart attack. And literally a year later, my mentor, Mickey Roth, many of you know, died of breast cancer. Only to 5 months later for me to lose my dad. My dad was the first man I had ever loved. And on each one of those occasions, I did what I always do. I put on my control hat, get up, dress up, and show up. I flew back home, took care of all the funerals, stood at the head of all the caskets, did the eulogy, put on my best face, got back on the plane, came home, and went back to my perfect world. And suddenly I realized, coming back after my dad's death, that everything in life I no longer cared about. That was in September of 20. February of 2021, I knew my marriage was fixing to go down the tank. I knew I no longer cared about my job. I no longer cared about any more of doing all the things I had done in the community for my 26 years. I told my husband, I said, I'm going to get into therapy, because if I don't, we're not going to make it. I'm going to give it 1 year, and what I do know is 1 year from now, I'm not going to be in the same space. And he took that literally. If you know my husband, he is a huge football person, so he is hyper-focused on football, has been very successful in that. And a couple of months into it, he was taking everything I said literally, and he came to me one day in the backyard and he goes, look, I'm not perfect, I'll never be perfect, I'm probably always going to be messing up even a year from now, and you've only given me till next February to fix this. And I just looked at him. We didn't discuss this morning, by the way. And I just looked at him and I said, honey.
It was your prayer too, so.
Right. Mm-hmm. It was. I looked at him and I said, honey, if our marriage was the football field, you'd come off the bench and you'd be throwing a Hail Mary right now. And he goes, I got it. I'm going to be a team member. And we went back to our normal routine. He got into a men's group at the church. We go to Foundations. And I continued my weekly therapy sessions and seeking God with everything in me. And I mean, I was beating on heaven's gates with bloody fist, going, God, you're going to have to change this. You're going to have to change me. You're going to have to change me. And I kept the inner child who had been hurt and wounded all those years was trying to surface, and the emotional and intellectual, you know what I'm saying. the brain part of Mindy would not, no, I have to protect her. It's fight or flee. We just talked about looking for the devil under every rock over here. I have to protect her at all costs, and no one's going to hurt her. If it is to be, it's up to me. I will control this. I'm going to make it work. I'll just keep window dressing until I can no longer window dress. And everything became unsurfaced. And David came to me one day, and he said, all I know is that if I draw closer to God, you will draw closer to me. And he was exactly right. So I just kept seeking. And from that moment on, I made the decision that it's no longer window dressing. I had to strip everything back and own my errors, own my anger, my bitterness, all those things that were keeping me from truly flourishing. And I just kept going back to God, saying, would you just use me? Would you just use me? And God kept saying, well, if you just get out of the way, I would. I mean, I'm usually 2 days ahead of him, wherever I'm going. I can be stronger than horseradish. Ask my husband. But at the end of the day, what God kept telling me is, Mindy, if you'll just surrender to me, and I don't want just your inner child, I want all of you. And I just did a study on chaos to clarity that God just gave me on live, love, and lift. And he said, Mindy, you have all the talents in the world, but if you don't love, they're nothing. So when I took that paradigm shift in my head and just gave up trying to be perfect and chose to just love, be intentional where I was, hire good people, get out of the way, and let God, the rest of it took over. David and I we're on 11 years now, and we're closer today than we ever were before. But it took a lot of this because we're two alpha A's struggling, and life is a struggle. And until I stopped window dressing and just admitted it, owned it, and got real with myself, that's where it happened. So.
Wow. Thank you so much. Appreciate your courage. Share all that. Yeah. Thank you. Lot in there, for sure. The window dressing and just brutal realities of life and loss, the things you can't control that kind of put you in tailspins, thinking. But man, I'm so honored that you shared that with us in this audience, and just your humility to seek help too. I think that's one of the things that type A's and leaders don't like doing very well, right?
No, we don't do it well at all.
Yeah, so man, there's times where we need people in our lives, so thank you so much. So Ryan, so could you tell us a little bit about, you share a little bit about your business, but tell us what you did before you became an executive pastor and now the executive in business, and then any thoughts you have about personal drifts that you've experienced and how you stay focused and tethered.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one word that I can use to describe how to stay centered, how to avoid drift, is intentionality. And the Bible says that we're to renew our mind daily with the Word and with prayer and all of those things. And I know that is a huge struggle in my life, to be that consistent, to be that focused and intentional on God, to keep myself from drifting toward more and more disorder in my life. And so for me, that's a theme that I can look through. Mindy, I identify so much with what you said because I grew up in a household like that where it was about the window dressing. Everything looks good, everybody thinks we're good, but behind the scenes, my parents' marriage was falling apart. But it was about, as long as everybody thought we were good, then everything was okay. And so that's how I grew up. It was, you don't let anybody in to what's really happening in here. You make it all look really good. So I grew up in a very performance, image oriented household. And God gifted me with some intelligence, and so academics were very easy for me. It was easy for me to achieve in academics. But because He didn't bless me with size or speed or any of those things for athletics, it was really hard for me to succeed in athletics, but I felt like I had to succeed in athletics, and so I poured myself into that and got to average in a lot of stuff. But I grew up in that mindset, and I carried that mindset with me into college and into my career to a point where I never had any peace about anything. This is before I knew Jesus. It was all about the next promotion. It was all about the next account I could land. It was all about the next pay raise. It was all about the next achievement. And when you make those achievements, there was a momentary satisfaction of, wow, I did it. But then that other voice that comes in and goes, well, they're going to figure out you don't really know what you're doing. They're going to figure out that this is all, you're just holding it together out here. Until I came to know Jesus Christ at 25 years old. And for me, I know a lot of people think that this is pretty elementary if you grew up in the church, but for me, it was an astounding revelation that I could have a personal relationship with God, and he didn't care about the things that I had done, good, bad, or otherwise, in my life. That was because my whole life was about score sheets and scorecards and achievement, and I'm here, and am I better than this person? And I remember guys being angry at times in my life because I'm like, I am so much better than this person, but they're happy. Why are they happy? I'm not happy. And so for me, coming to know Jesus and that revelation of unconditional love and forgiveness helped me forgive my family, my parents, and put me on a path of really kind of this day-to-day effort to keep myself centered in him, because trust me, I can drift back into achievement, performance, type A, let's get it done, I don't want to hear excuses kind of stuff. I can absolutely drift there if left to my own devices. But for me to be intentional, not only in business, but in my marriage, we have 3 teenage boys. As a dad, that's my number one discipleship responsibility is those guys. And I want to share just a story. I know we're short on time. If you're a parent in the room, I know the enemy likes to play with, wow, you really blew it there. Wow, you should have done this. Wow, why'd you say that? But I got the best Father's Day present I could ever get this past Father's Day. And here's what it said. It was a card from my oldest. He's 18. And he just wrote in there of his own accord, Dad, you're good at a lot of things. He said, but what I see most is that you're a servant. Thanks for showing me how to be a servant. And I'll take that with me for the rest of my life because it hasn't always been that way. That is a miracle of God that I could put myself below him and just serve others. And I talked about this movement of servant leaders who lead companies, who transform communities. It starts with that. It starts with how do I become a servant as a leader and then watch God work.
Yeah, awesome. There must be something about this church you're crying, Ryan.
I know. Man, did we get that on film? I don't cry often.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Any other thoughts as you were listening to each other's story? What stood out to you?
So I wanted to say something that I didn't say earlier, and that's get an accountability partner. Amen. And I have to tell you, that's been my biggest, and I didn't pick them. God chose who my accountability partners were. I will tell you, when I came to Timberline Church, one of the things I cried about during the message of the talents was God told me I had to teach an exercise class at Timberline Church. What kind of message is that, right? I did it here for 11 years. I taught a free exercise class for 11 years at the graciousness of Timberline Church to allow us to open up. We had 50 women that came twice a week that we taught classes to, but it wasn't just about the exercise. We prayed afterwards. We shared. And there was a lady that walked in, and this is what I wanted to share. Her name was Sandy. Scared the EBGBs out of me. She could quote scripture so quickly, and she scared me. And I'm like, oh, dear Lord, why are you bringing her into this class? And we would pray afterwards, and I would write notes, and I know she was going to correct me. You know, I just knew it. I could feel it. She never did. She is still my accountability partner to this day. Even though she's moved to Florida, I go to Sandy almost all the time, and she keeps me on track. God always provides when you ask, when you're asking in prayer. So my biggest thing is to keep you from drifting is get those strong accountability partners that aren't going to just tell you what you want to hear. They're going to tell you what God wants you to hear.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that so much. And I want to piggyback on that if I have a minute, but any other thoughts you'd like to share?
Well, first of all, the intentional piece is pretty powerful in your industries. Don't hire people that are just like you. look for people who have those assets in other areas that are going to help elevate you. My team is amazing. I can now let go of the reins, and they're going to do great things, and I trust my organization now, but that's only been by the grace of God. And then lastly, intentional about your walk. If you've ever shared that true intimacy with Christ, seek for it with everything in you. There are going to be seasons in your life where you feel dry, where you feel like you're praying and your prayers are not going above the ceiling. But that's where you've got to, just like King David, lean on those words of He will never leave you nor forsake you, and continue to motivate yourself. If you're not a self-motivator, put yourself around other people who are motivators. My husband tells me all the time, he can tell by the scowl on I do not take Botox, but I probably should. But he tells me all the time, no stinking thinking, Mindy. Stay positive, no stinking thinking, because he is the positive king over here. Whereas I can go in a spiral of, you're not good enough. It's, I go all the way back to my history. It's very easy to wallow under that cloud, and it's a choice. It's an active choice every day to get up and say, I am worthy. I am loved. I have talents. I know God can use me. I know I'm a sinner. I know I fall short every single day, but I'm going to get up today, make an intentional choice to put one foot in front of the other, no matter what my circumstances are in front of me, and I'm going to choose to let Him use me as a vessel. Just like this morning at 5:30 when I went, I don't want to be used as a vessel. I don't want to do this, but God said it's time.
I got to tell one more story. I don't think you'll mind this. I think the first time I actually met you was on a Zoom call in the middle of COVID. You remember that? And if I'm not mistaken, I think you are part of a couple leaders in the community who just say, man, we just need to pray because I don't know what to do. And I remembered that. That was a powerful, powerful time. And there are seasons we just don't know what to do, and that's our next only resort sometimes, right? Just praying together with other people in our lives. So, we were going to take some questions, but we don't. I don't know if we have enough time for that. So before I share some other thoughts, any other thoughts you guys have that came to your mind as you were listening?
The only thing I wanted to share was we had a very, very tragic thing happen in our family. And I remember crying in my home and praying to God and saying, I can't do this. I can't do this. Never thought to take my life, but I kept saying to Him, I can't dip. Guess who showed up at my front door, kept ringing my doorbell, ringing my doorbell, ringing my doorbell until I showed up? My friend Sandy. So when He brought her into my life all those years ago, I didn't know why He did. He did.
Amen. So don't go down yet. I just want to share my heart with you on a few things. As I've been listening to this, we have a lot of business leaders, owners, influencers in the room. For those of you who have direct reports, your people on your teams do not check their lives at the door when they come through it. Right? So I think maybe one of the things I'm sensing in the Spirit is just let us all be cognizant of the fact that everyone has, you've heard some transparency up here, and I'll share a quick story myself, but every leader has these internal, emotional, spiritual aches and past wounds. Every person in your company, in your organization, have those same things. So one of the greatest things we can do as leaders is just to care for people and try to draw those out and help them find ways to help, with whatever's going on in their life. And I know Warren is here this morning with Yoder Family Companies, and he shared in a previous event. They have this Yoder Cares program. I'm so proud of what they're doing. They just try to identify needs of people in their organization and whatever they can do to meet those needs. And the stories I've heard from that, it's just phenomenal. And that really, what is leadership, is really what it is. It's just caring and loving people. I think that's been said over and over again this morning. So I just want to reiterate a couple things. At our table, we were talking about what causes drift, one person said, and it reminded me of a passage Paul's mentoring Timothy in the book of 1 Timothy. And there's a couple things just that are pretty profound. He's trying to help Timothy make it as a young leader in a really, really difficult situation as a leader in Ephesus. And he says, do not neglect the spiritual gifts that's been given you. We can drift so easily by trying to be like someone else or implementing gifts that we do not possess, that aren't ours, to step out. It's like, stop trying to be like someone else. Embrace who you are and how God's wired you. There's nothing like trying to do it like someone else or step out of your gift zones that'll cause you to drift and just like a boa constrictor, choke the joy and contentment and peace right out of your life. So knowing your gifts, yes.
Or don't wait until politics is perfect or the church is perfect, because it's not going to be and never will be.
Yes.
And if you're waiting on that to happen, crawl in a hole. You're going to stay there a while.
I love it. That's good. And then one other thing, just a little bit later in that passage, don't miss this, because some of us here in this room, as I've coached with leaders, we talk about this all the time. You got to do things that are fun and keep you replenished. It's like, what is that? Let me help you find it. Because in that passage, just a little bit later, it says, pay close attention to yourself, for as you do, you will not only secure the salvation for yourself, but for those you lead. And I think what that means is, we've heard it here, is like sometimes, and then this is where my story comes, I was in a dark place for almost a year that I never thought I experienced in my life. Similar to your story, not losing loved ones, but just really challenging times with some of my kids and financial challenges and just gut punch after gut punch after gut punch. And I even thought about taking my life, and I couldn't even believe I got there. But here's one of the reasons you talked about accountability. Is I wasn't practicing when I was preaching in that season. I always was good about seeking out a few people that I could be totally transparent with and lean into. And I didn't have that at that time. And that was one of the things that helped me to get back. So I jumped into a men's group of CEOs and leaders like myself, and I drive to Denver. And I spend a whole day once a month to invest, going there this afternoon after our lunch event called The Way, because I need that. I need that accountability. I need that help. So maybe that's part of your step today. You know, where's your gifts? Where you need to reach out to get some help. If you're in a struggling spot, don't try to do it alone. Isolation is a choice. You don't have to choose it. So would you give a round of applause for the man? What amazing job you guys did right on the spot. So thank you for coming up. Yeah.